Do you see a new government that you could live with in Gaza in 2026?
If we disarm Hamas, whether with an international force or by any other means, yes, I see a different future for Gaza. And it's the one remaining step. Everybody understands that. I think Hamas understands it. That's why they don't want to do it, because, you know, the point here is not to negotiate with Hamas. That's not the job, their job. Their job is to vanish, stop, no more. And you know who wants it more than anyone else? The people of Gaza.
Disarming Hamas in Gaza is a big sticking point. You heard the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This 20-point peace plan of the items that are now fully implemented. You have battle lines frozen, free entry and exit in and out of Gaza, Israeli forces withdrawn to agreed upon line. But there are many items that have not yet fully been implemented. Redevelopment, all hostages returned. There is still one remains of one hostage still not returned. Hamas agrees to not have any governance role in Gaza, interfaith dialogue established, and basically the big one, disarmament. Let's start there with our panel. Mary Catherine Ham, Fox News contributor. Fox News contributor Ben Domenech, host of the Big Ben podcast, and Yemisi Egbewale, former chief of staff and advisor to the Biden White House press office. Mary Catherine, what did you take from the interview?
I take that as Netanyahu notes that they are instinctively and conceptually aligned on the need to fight terrorists and bad guys. And I think Trump, his doctrine, such that it is a lot about reestablishing deterrence that was lost during the Biden years. And he's happy to do that in targeted ways with strong partners. And I think Netanyahu represents that. He said at one point that we can do it the easy way, and if it can't be done the easy way, we'll do it another way. And I think Trump and he have shown that that is the case. And I think also seeing them together is just a reminder that just in this calendar year, the way that Trump is able to think outside the box and outside the old diplomatic ways of doing things, particularly in the Middle East, and this is punctuated by the latest protests in Iran, can really change the face of that region and has changed motivations and the map in some ways.
Yeah, Yemisi, those protests in Iran are real. We've seen some live fire now as of tonight by the Iranians on protesters in the streets of Tehran. This, as the Israeli Prime Minister said, their ballistic missile efforts are going back. They're trying to reestablish some of the things that were taken out by the Israelis and the U.S., as well as the nuclear efforts.
Yeah, it was great to see Netanyahu talk about deterrence and show some restraint. I think that everybody agrees, and it's not controversial to say that Iran is a growing threat and a danger to both Israel and also to America. I wonder, though, about the fatigue that some people might feel. I know that Democrats might talk when we come back to Congress next year about what does that look like long term if America gets involved and if anything ramps up and establishes. And hopefully the president uses that time, along with Hegseth and Rubio, to have conversations with members of Congress about what next steps could look like.
Yeah, Ben, it's much like the Ukraine-Russia situation in that there is optimism when these negotiations are happening at Mar-a-Lago, and behind the scenes they're talking optimistically, but then there's realism in Ukraine's perspective about Vladimir Putin and dealing with him, and in Hamas, dealing with Hamas and disarming Hamas.
Yeah, I think you could put as many kind of good spins on these things as you want. When you come out of these negotiations, you can say things went well, you can say things were cordial, you can say there was an exchange of ideas, etc. But so often what we see is that when you back away from them, there is not, real change in terms of the ramifications. I do think that, to Mary Catherine's point, the amount that President Trump has achieved within this first year in terms of how he has changed the way that the Middle East looks, the ramifications for our allies in the region, has been enormous. You can't underestimate that at all. But there's a long sort of road ahead when it comes to all of these different things, particularly when it comes to Iran. And a lot of that, it involves unpredictability that I think is going to make certain aspects of the coalition, the unique one that elected Donald Trump, uncomfortable perhaps in the decisions that he makes.
Mary Catherine, here's Reuters about Islamic operatives captured. The United States and its partner forces killed or captured nearly 25 Islamic State operatives since it launched retaliatory strikes in Syria earlier this month. The U.S. carried out large-scale strikes against dozens of Islamic State targets in Syria on December 19th in retaliation for an attack on American personnel. You heard the Israeli Prime Minister reference that. What about this dichotomy between focusing on foreign policy and trying to have success on a broad world scale and focusing on domestic policy ahead of a 2026 midterm?
Look, I think it's tricky because fatigue is real, and Ben is correct that part of the coalition will be uncomfortable if there is too much sort of sustained international attacks, I think, and adventurism as they see it sometimes. I mean, when you've got the stuff, and it is in our hemisphere, and I understand why we're interested in it, but I think it's 30 attacks now on the boats with a land attack in Venezuela. That is more muscular, that is more sustained than we have seen other places. I think Trump is really at his best when it is occasional bellicosity, very focused and very successful. The Iran strikes being a really good example of that. And there are people who will lose patience if he doesn't give a sustained argument for each one of these endeavors.
Meantime, there's a sustained effort to go after this fraud in Minnesota. I mean, it's not just Minnesota. They're expanding to other places as well. And what they're finding there is really quite something. Take a listen to this back and forth.
Just like in Minnesota. Are you kidding me? This could be the largest waste and abuse and scandal and fraud in the history of our country. And that we're following lawlessness, not individual people.
A lot of the journalism that's been going on the last couple of days has been really dishonest. I do feel like what was done was someone came to our building outside of operating hours. When there's a specific sign on our door, you don't come outside of operational hours and then say they're using taxpayer money. That was completely false.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to back up some of these videos, the viral videos of Nick Shirley and others. But tonight, Ben, the HHS Deputy Secretary Jim O'Neill announced pausing all payments. We've frozen all child care payments to the state of Minnesota. You've probably read the serious allegations. The state of Minnesota has funneled millions of taxpayer dollars to fraudulent daycares across Minnesota over the past decade. I have activated our Defend the Spend system for all ACF payments. Starting today, all ACF payments across America will require a justification and a receipt or photo evidence before we send money to a state. So they are taking action on a big scale, Ben.
Jim O'Neill is a guy who cares a lot about the way the taxpayer money is spent, and I know that for a fact. He is someone who I think is right to go after this in the way that he has, and frankly to do what every normal, reasonable American expects in this situation, which is to say we shouldn't be sending out this money without first proving that you even have children that you are serving. I think that this level of fraud is only going to expand across the country as people become more aware of how their own taxpayer dollars, which they have sent toward these programs in order to benefit children and the least of us, the neighborhoods and communities around them, has been manipulated and stolen, frankly, in order to benefit criminal causes and causes overseas that it was never meant to be sent to in the first place. We need a real crackdown.
You know, Yemisi, just as we talk about focusing on foreign policy instead of domestic policy, when you hear some Democrats defending this in a different way, saying that it is jumping the shark, that it's made up, or that this fraud is not all there, isn't that a political danger too?
It is. Fraud is fraud, no matter who's committing it. And there can be some people who take issue with discrepancies within Nick Shirley's video that exposed a lot of this. And we can talk about the fact that this was investigated years ago. But I think the tepid responses from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and the kind of passiveness from Governor Tim Walz, who is positioning himself as a Democratic leader as we look to 2026 and 2028, is really disappointing. I think there has to just be a firm hand here in admitting that there were some holes, oversight was not done, good governance needs to be injected into the situation, and we just simply can't excuse it.
Yeah, 10 seconds, Mary Catherine. I mean, this could be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it feels to many people like a social contract broken here that's been fraying for some time. The argument during the Obama years was, look, if you work hard, you should reap the rewards and we'll give you these programs. But the programs then end up exploited and expanded, and every dollar not stewarded is stolen. It's a problem.
All right, panel. Thank you so much. Happy New Year.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.